محمد أكرم من زيد. So this indicates that both of them have some karam, right? But Muhammad has more karam than Zayd. Okay? Sorry, Zayd. Okay? Muhammadun akramu min Zaydin. So it implies that Zayd has some karam. Does it have to imply this?
If I have 0 apples, Martin has 2 apples, he still has more apples.
And you have how many?
0.
0, right? So, I mean, there is a kind of asl of it that you are comparing them because there's something to compare. It's not a very useful sentence to say Mateen has more apples than Sheath. If Mateen has apples and Sheath doesn't have apples, so he's not part of the discussion on apple ownership, right? So it doesn't make sense really to say Mateen has more apples than Sheath, although technically it is true even if Sheath has 0. So like, look to context. If you look at some places where Allah Azza wa Jal is described with Af'al al-Tafdeel, we looked at Ahsanul Khaliqeen, right? So we looked at a couple of ways that can be interpreted and explained. And one of them, at least according to the AI, and it didn't provide me an actual Mufassir source, however, I think there is something to it. It was almost along the lines of, actually no, there was something in Ar-Razi that I think supported this point. But the point being, it is على الفرض والتقدير, right? Hypothetically, أحسن الخالقين, in the sense of even supposing that there were other khaliqeen, then he is ahsan, right? So that's one way of saying there's not an actual mufadala happening because there isn't even an existence of the other thing to be compared with, right? But in other places they say these things are masloob al-mufadala. An example that comes to mind is وهو الذي يبدأ الخلق ثم يعيده وهو أهون عليه. So the zahir of this and the translations, you can go and review them. You may well see it is he who initiates the creation and then repeats it. And it is, how would this be translated? Easier or lighter upon him, right? So it is even easier for him. So here, the theological conundrum is, if it's easier the second time, what does this imply? It was harder the first time, right? وَهَذَا فِي حَقِّ اللَّهِ مُحَالٌ. To suggest that there was any difficulty that could be removed or reduced the second time round. Okay? So then they say, ahwan is masloob al-mufadala, right? So then they can just say, it means hayyin. This is the most plain and boring explanation in the sense that you then did masloob al-lafz as well, like you just took away the hamza, converted the waw into a ya, and you then undid the problem of the text rather than making clear the beauty of the text, right? So sometimes the work of the ulama is to like rescue you from an emergency, but we can say like this is the entry level, which is to say, if nothing else, we may at least say, well, it doesn't have to be a comparative at all. It can just be in the sense of the sifa, right? But then, okay, let's move one level up from that. One level up from that is to say, what is particular to ahwan as opposed to hayyin? What might we say? A sort of standard toolkit in balagha and tafsir. What would be? What do you think that ahwan might be compared to hayyin?
It's emphasis or not emphasis.
Right. The strength of that meaning, right? So here the translation might be, it is very easy for him, meaning both times. Okay? And يبدأ الخلق ثم يعيده وهو الخلق في كلتا الحالتين وكلتا المرتين أهون عليه. Right? So أهون then is a kind of مبالغة in hayyin, strengthening the meaning of how easy it is. Then we may say, in terms of like looking for a nice translation of this, maybe this mubalagha is saying it is easier than easy, and easier than you even think that it could be for him, right? Because even something for us is easy, but it's easy and it contains some level of difficulty, right? Lifting this cup is easy, but what's easier is not doing it, right? وَهُوَ أَهْوَنُ عَلَيْهِ, almost like now coming back to the تفضيل meaning, أهون مما تتخيل, right? And everything for him is أهون. There's nothing يعني أهون من بعض or أصعب من بعض, right? So everything for him, and I might translate it, is as easy as can be, right? As easy as can be. So sometimes the tafdeel meaning can be in something like this, as much as can be, as much as you could possibly think that it is. Okay, are we done with our ta'wilat? You know, if we're not in the a context of jidal over the issue of tashbih and so on, we will say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using words يعني تقريبا للأذهان من علو قدسيته, giving us some sense of the transcendent in words which are relatable, right? So you might not want to call it tashbih, but like I'm just using that word in a plain linguistic sense, right? So for us, for human beings, anything would be easier the second time round. So there's a point being made here, isn't there? Right? So if you created something and then you did it again the second time, like how many IKEA Billy bookcases we've assembled there, right? Every time it got easier, right? The first time your instructions and the pieces and so on. After that it becomes like muscle memory. So the argument here is, what is making you think that it is difficult for Allah to recreate you when you are here, and that shows that He created you in the first place, right? أَفَعَيِينَ بِالْخَلْقِ الْأَوَّلِ بَلْ هُمْ فِي لَبْسٍ مِّنْ خَلْقٍ جَدِيدٍ. What is it that makes them think it is somehow hard for Allah to recreate us, when by our own reasoning we should conclude it is easier for Allah the second time than it was the first time? Subhanallah. And yet, when you know better, you would in fact realize that it's not easier, but it is as easy every time for Allah as if He had done it a million times, as if He had done it a billion times. There is no more difficulty in the first creation or the second creation than in the millionth, right? So all of this in وَهُوَ أَهْوَنُ عَلَيْهِ. Isn't it amazing, right? But now we come back to the Nahw. Oh, sorry, it's Al-Isra, verse 72. ومن كان في هذه أعمى، هذه أي هذه الدنيا، فهو في الآخرة أعمى. Now suppose the ayah stops here. I would say if you were blind in this life, you're blind in the next life. But then وَأَضَلُّ سَبِيلًا. أضل is أفعل تفضيل. So even then, you can still understand the sentence as وَمَنْ كَانَ فِي هَذِهِ أَعْمَى, whoever is blind, فَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ أَعْمَى, then he's blind in the hereafter, and even more astray than he was. So the comparison could be just on the dalal and not on the ama. But why am I saying this? Because you might be want to say, no, clearly it's just أفعل تفضيل. Anyone was thinking that? I'm accusing you now. Was nobody just thinking أعمى could be أفعل تفضيل? The second time? Okay. So this is controversial. The basic rule is, you cannot form أفعل تفضيل from something that was already أفعل. Right, so this is a sarf question. maybe it won't come up here at all. But if it's already, for example, something is colored, so it's Ahmar. You can't be Ahmar min shay'in akhar, right? What would you have to say here? How do I say it? Redder. أكثر حمرة أو أشد حمرة probably is what we'd go with, right? أشد حمرة وأشد عما, right? So you have to use another way of saying it because you can't form أفعل from أفعل, which is for things like colors, certain sifat, and also علل, defects. So عما is a defect. We'd use more politically correct words, but in that sense, it is أعمى. So he's suffering from ama. So then, more blind, you'd have to say ashaddu aman. But some might accept that a'ma could be أفعل تفضيل. Some might accept. Interestingly, in the qira'ah of Abi Amr, I'm pretty sure it's this. Normally I have Sabir here now. Probe him on it. He makes a distinction between the two. So he does one of them with imala and the other one without imala, as if to say that in fact I am considering these not to be the same word. So he's considering the second one to be أفعل تفضيل. And as I understand, if you're going to go into the deep tawjih here, when there's أفعل تفضيل, then it's considered incomplete because it means أعمى من. So because it's not complete, so he doesn't do the imala here, because imala should be at the end of a word. That's the kind of, right? So he says, hopefully I got this the right way around, وَمَنْ كَانَ فِي هَذِهِ أَعْمَى فَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ أَعْمَى. The point being, some of the scholars accepted that this could be أفعل تفضيل, but you would say, على غير القياس. So this, you can't generalize this rule, right? Chaos will ensue if we allow this to be a thing. But here is where, again, I'm trying to show you an aspect of tafsir which doesn't always get talked about. And that is, the perfection of the words sometimes means that you should allow that the rule is being broken. Right? So here it's ambiguous. Is Allah saying that He's even more blind and more astray, or that He's blind and more astray? Right? So it's like it doesn't have to mean more blind, but you can still get that from the implication. So even if I don't accept the grammatical, that grammatically أعمى, the second one, is أفعل تفضيل, then still, in terms of context, it's there because وَمَنْ كَانَ فِي هَذِهِ أَعْمَى فَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ أَعْمَى. If he had, you had 0 apples before. If you had 0 sight, you can have less than 0 sight. Right? So even logically, there is nothing that's more a'ma than, right? Probably. There's no negative sight. Or is there? Is there something in the hereafter which is a'ma min a'ma? I don't know. فَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ أَعْمَى. He's blind there as well. He's still at 0. وَأَضَلُّ سَبِيلًا. So his blindness in the akhirah is of a worse consequence than the ama in this. And of course, to be very clear, it is not talking about physical disability. It's talking about يعني أعمى روحيا وفكريا. And he did not see the signs. He turned away from, he was willfully blind. So let's say whoever was willfully blind in the dunya is forcibly blind, is blinded in the hereafter. So he had amal basira, and now he's got amal basira wal basar ma'an. فهو أعمى وأضل سبيلا. So I think we're not supposed to cancel out the tafdeel here, but it's almost like, even if the rules don't allow this word, Allah is saying, I'm going to make you see it anyway, right? You pay attention. I do mean that. I mean more blind. And whether you get that from the lafz within the rules, of course the rules were not codified at the time of revelation, but this goes against the norm. even in Quranic usage, right? But the fact that it contains that, but it's so much more delightful than ومن كان في هذه أعمى فهو في الآخرة أشد عمى. I mean, if I followed the rules, then all this kind of, the layers of meaning would have been removed from us, right? This honestly speaking, is where I feel the i'jaz of the Quran, right? It's not always the examples that are very, easy to package. And I appreciate those who do it, who package things for everyone. But I think that, you get deeper into them the more that you appreciate the tools of language, the tools of, obviously, Nahw and Sarf and Balagha. And you start to see how the Quran flouts those rules or plays with those rules. And the rules become subservient to the text. Right? Because obviously as a learner, you do taqdees of the rules. And this is in all things. If you want to be a calligrapher, take the work of calligraphy and trace your pen over it until it becomes something which is sajiyya. That's in order to master the rules. But a real master is someone who doesn't follow rules. But the master has to go through the rules. If they just jump, it is possible for someone to be a genuine master that, ilm ladunni, mawhiba, ilahiyya, right? But many people kid themselves. This is what they're doing. And they're like, yeah, I'm doing ijtihad, Ijtihad. Ijtihad in the asl, it means working really hard, right? So where's your hard work? Where's the years of struggle? Not struggling as in, I did my research, bro. I struggled to type things in on ChatGPT and get answers. No, this is not struggle. This is all of it is being handed to you. وكذلك قوله تعالى أتستبدلون الذي هو أدنى بالذي هو خير. A lot of translators, or at least some translators, tripped up on this one because I can't remember now what I've written in the assured translation, but you can be assured that I was careful about it, right? Because you have to be confident in how you're using the English expression as well. So, أَتَسْتَبْدِلُونَ الَّذِي هُوَ, who's speaking here, right? Musa alayhi salam is speaking to his qawm. And he said, would you تَسْتَبْدِلُونَ الَّذِي هُوَ أَدْنَى بِالَّذِي هُوَ خَيْرٌ. So what is the adna in the context of the ayah? Which food? The basal and the adas and the qitha and the foom. Right, as I always say, the ingredients of the tarkadal, right? So they're asking for these things, and this is الذي هو أدنى بالذي هو خير. What is khair is what Allah is sending them, al-manna wal-salwa. And more generally, it's like He's asking them a subtext. You're not happy with what Allah has, all this that He's given you, you're hankering for something that you're like slavery, And that's the ambiguity in ihbitu misran. Ihbitu misran, with tanween in our mushaf also, it's with alif. So it is misran. And the rule tells us that, it therefore can't be read as ihbitu misra, and it can't be meaning Egypt, because as an alam, it has to be mamnu' min as-sarf. So it has to be ihbitu misra. Although some grammarians allow that you could say ihbitu misran and intend Egypt, right? Some allowed that. But if we, again here, the rule, the ambiguity about the following the rule or breaking the rule, again takes you into a territory of understanding the ayah in a far more powerful way. Because grammatically, it just means go down to any settlement. Go down to a town. Misran ma, Misran min al-amsar. It didn't say ihbitu ila aqrabi Misra or aqrabi Misrin, right? He didn't say ihbitu al-Misra. He says ihbitu Misran. Right, wherever you like, go, right? But it's like he has used the word, and it raises a question in the original language, how did that work? Was there a wordplay in the original language, or does the Quran in a way collapse two statements that he made, into one word, one very bitter word? اهبطوا مصرا. So you kind of have to imagine here, if in the English language we use the word an Egypt for a town, right? Yeah, go down to an Egypt, why don't you? Go down to any Egypt. And it's like a triggering word. Let me read it with the intervening tafsir as well. And when you said, and recall your poor reception of these favors, like when you said, Moses, we won't put up with the same food day after day. So pray to your sustainer, so he brings out for us some of the earth's produce, its herbs, cucumbers, garlic, lentils, and onions. He said, would you really choose something inferior over what is superior? Go on down to some town, or even back to Egypt. That way you can get what you asked for. They were all covered in humiliation for failing to go forth when God made it easy for them, and poverty for their ingratitude at his many bounties. And they ended up with wrath from God in the next life. That was because they kept rejecting God's signs and killing the prophets with no claim to right. And then it was also because they disobeyed and displayed aggression. Or we may say, those evils respectively stem from how they disobeyed and displayed aggression. وقوله قال رب السجن أحب إلي مما يدعونني إليه. And here the Mufassirun sometimes make some istishkal. How can he say the sijn is ahab? This means, first of all, that what they are calling him to he has some hub towards it. Right? So they're saying, because remember at the beginning when I said 0 apples and all this, right? The point was, be contextual, don't be very ritualistic and dogmatic. That if there's a comparison between two things, فَهُوَ يُحِبُّ مَا يَدْعُونَهُ إِلَيْهِ وَهُوَ يُحِبُّ السِّجْن لَا يُحِبُّ أَحَدًا مِنْهُمَا. But it's like saying, like أَخَفُّ الضَّرَرَيْن. أنا بين خيارين كلاهما مر. I'm between two bitter cucumbers. Right? Now what's the correct translation? أنا بين خيارين. I have two options, right? I'm between a rock and a hard place, right? From the frying pan into the fire, right? So there is then a comparison, just like, okay, the sijn is bad, but what they're calling me towards is worse, right? But then we can ponder on why is ahab, the way of saying it. The other thing that you can notice that we didn't yet touch on with أفعل تفضيل is the fact that sometimes it can be kind of in place of the ism fa'il meaning or the ism maf'ul meaning, right? So here it's not the sijn is ahab in the sense of it's more loving, but it's more beloved, right? Ahabbu ilayya. So that's another aspect of أفعل تفضيل you have to pay attention to, right? So if Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is Ahmad, Ahmad has two possible meanings, right? Tell me one of them. But it's always tafdeel. So what does it mean then, huwa Ahmad? Either it means أكثر الحامدين حمدا أو أكثر المحمودين حمدا, right? So it can mean either of these things. So sometimes they say, well, because he is Ahmad and Muhammad, so then they are complementary meanings. So Muhammad is ism maf'ul, right? So he is Muhammad, which is more intensive than saying Mahmud, right? So he is Muhammad in the sense of Mahmud and Ahmad in the sense of Hamid, right? So then they want to distribute the two names according to these meanings of ism al-fa'il and ism al-maf'ul. Okay, so Mujahid is I appreciate it. You're asking us to maybe ponder on this, ahabbu ilayya. So I hadn't, done that before, so that's why I was seeing a bab of tadabbur here. that what is in Yusuf alayhi salam saying, Habbu ilayya, maybe because on some level, if Allah Azza wa Jal chooses it for him, then he goes past the maqam of sabr to the maqam of rida, and past the maqam of rida to the maqam of mahabba. So it's one thing just to tolerate what Allah puts you through, right? And that's the bare minimum that we are asked to do. But then a person who loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would be, rather than just tolerant, they would be content. Like, yeah, Allah decreed that for me, so I'm happy with that. You can say like, rida can be like being happy with the decree of Allah. But then even something more that's like, delighted. Yeah, I just remember one video that doesn't escape from my mind. One of the mothers of Gaza. And she's on camera, but she's beseeching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and she says, هل رضيت عنا يا رب? She's just looking at it as, what we are going through. Allah is putting us through, and she only sees Allah. She doesn't even bother to speak to, where are you, ya Arab, ya Ummat al-Isra? No. Ya Rab, take, she had, her children have been stushhidu. So she's saying, take, Ya Rab, take until you are pleased, Ya Rab. These are the maqamat of spirituality. And that's why, I think a lot of people have to have a reality check. We are people of spirituality, or we are people of aqidah. Where is your aqidah? This is aqidah. Right? Your classes and your debates on Twitter and your categorizations and your hatred for the Muslims, this is not aqidah. The mother calling out, Ya Rabb, are you pleased with us? Have you taken what you are pleased to take? If not, then take and take and take. This is an aqidah which, I can't fathom the depth of it. This is iman. This is the real thing. Okay, so what happens when you have Af'al Tafdeel and it's got Al on it? This takes us from the comparative to the superlative, right? Comparative to now superlative, like better and best. So what about Allahu Akbar? Is it comparative or superlative? Comparative. So then we should have min, or it has to be known from the maqam.
That's always referring to Allah Akbar from anything that you're doing.
So the taqdeer بالعربي من كل شيء. الله أكبر من كل شيء هكذا قالوا. الله أكبر من كل شيء. So often when we translate it, we say God is the greatest. So it's not that it's absolutely wrong, it's just that it's not precise in this respect. So the greatest would be Allah, Al-Akbar. Allahu huwa Al-Akbar. This would be the superlative, right? This is the greatest. Of course, the meaning ends up at the same. When you say Akbaru min kulli shay, fahuwa Al-Akbaru. But there's again something, Akbar, in the lafz that is used. There's something better about saying Allahu Akbar than Al-Akbar. Al-Akbar, I would suggest, implies that, there's kubara and kibar, kabirin, okay? And Allah is the greatest of them, right? So this issue of actual comparison becomes a bit awkward here because, the Quran is clearly destroying the idea of a pantheon of gods. And the mushrikun, they were not only idol worshippers, they considered Allah as one of. Right? So Allahu Akbar is not as the simple statement of He is the greatest of the gods, because that's actually what they already believed. Right? because they believe he was the creator. We could look to the ayat. If you ask them this, they will say Allah. So they had some sense that he's the greatest. And then other place they say, we only worship these things. ما نعبدهم إلا ليقربونا إلى الله زلفى. So he is the highest of the gods. So it's not maybe clear enough to say Al-Akbar. In fact, it might affirm, or they might take it as a statement that affirms their aqidah, even if that's not what's intended. But when he says Allahu Akbar, it's a better tanzih, because he is always Akbar. وهو أكبر مما تقولون وهو أكبر مما تتخيلون. So you might, and this is speaking, let's say first to the mushrikeen, you think that he is just the greatest of the gods. No, he is greater than that. Right? We talked about this kind of concept of أحسن الخالقين, the potential that is like على فرض أن يكون هناك خالقين. Right? So the point is, he is greater, always greater, always greater. Not just greater than everything, but greater than your comparison, greater than any attempt to define him. So I always think like, in the adhan, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. I know we say it 4 times and then we say it again, but even just the 2, just start with the 2. Allahu Akbar first tells us that Allah is greater. Then we call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mind. We think of him and we think of his greatness. And then we hear again, Allahu Akbar, Akbar min dhalik. Whatever you conceived of him, he is greater than that as well. Allahu Akbar again, Allahu Akbar again. And then every adhan you hear, he is greater, he is greater, he is greater. Right? There's no end point of your tanzih and your tamjeed and your tasbih that would say, I now comprehend the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it was just Al-Akbar. This is comparative in a way that, to me, sounds limiting. Right? Because Al-Akbar is not infinitely great. It just has to be great. It just has to be a notch above the others. But Akbar, wa Akbar, wa Akbar, wa Akbar is unlimited. Right? Wallahu a'lam. Wa a'lam.